Hey guys, tonight we wander into a sleepy grove just before sunrise, where the flowers are a little too enthusiastic, and the goddess of grain has an itch she can't scratch. Dew beads shimmer on petals that are humming. No, vibrating. Vibrating with something you can't quite name until Demeter shows up and sneezes so hard the birds fall out of the sky. You were just looking for a nap spot, maybe under that olive tree with the soft grass and early spring buzz, but instead, you find yourself at the edge of what will eventually be known by very bored scholars in very dusty scroll rooms as the first divine pollen incident in mythological history. You probably won't survive this if you're allergic to daffodils. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly through a grove bursting with untamed life. Blossoms open mid-air. Ivy curls around your ankles even as you walk. The air is dense with something, expectant. Then you hear it, a single cataclysmic achoo that shakes pollen from every leaf and makes your eyelids twitch. Demeter, in all her earthy elegance, stands at the center, blinking at the floral explosion she just triggered. Her nostrils flare like a bull's. "Was that me?" she mutters, clearly offended by her own sneeze. You nod, or maybe you don't. You're too busy coughing out golden dust and wondering whether it's possible to drown in microscopic flower guts. This isn't the first time it's happened. Ancient texts say Demeter's body reacts to seasonal changes, especially to Persephone's departure, and return with divine overcorrection. One year, she made wheat grow so fast it strangled an entire village. Another time, she sneezed a new species of ragweed into existence. Modern scholars believe these were allegories for agricultural shifts, but the more fringe theory, and arguably the funnier one, claims that Demeter quite literally birthed seasonal allergies just by being overwhelmed with emotion and an excess of goldenrod. Historians still argue whether the Thessalian pollen bloom was a meteorological event or a divine tantrum. Either way, you're standing knee-deep in sneeze-triggered flora that didn't exist yesterday. You reach for a handkerchief. Demeter hands you a laurel leaf instead. "It's natural," she says with a sniff, "and sacred." You nod politely and immediately sneeze into the leaf. Suddenly, a grove of sneeze-sensitive orchids ripple in sympathy. Their petals curl inward, then unfurl with a high-pitched ping, like a chorus of spring-loaded traps. You duck just in time. Demeter looks amused. Ah, the Ophiotropia bloom, sensitive to embarrassment and strong exhalation. You mentally take note, never exhale again. She walks you to a grove within the grove, one she calls her experimental mood garden. Here, plants only bloom when she feels certain things: wistfulness, hunger, jealousy, or low-level annoyance. Today, they're all in bloom. You ask, cautiously, whether any of them are safe to sit next to. She points to a small, ferny patch surrounded by empty space. That one's emotionless. You settle in gratefully. The fern does seem chill, until a squirrel sneezes nearby, and the fern bolts upright like it's been accused of theft. Somewhere behind you, bees argue over who gets to pollinate the weirdest flower. It smells like burnt cinnamon and regret. Demeter sighs beside you. They didn't used to do this. You know, back before Persephone insisted on importing those underworld lilies. Ever since she brought those home, the local plants have been overreacting. You resist the urge to mention your rapidly swelling sinuses. To be fair, there was a time when seasonal allergies were unknown in ancient Greece, or so they claim. Then Demeter started channeling grief through flora, and suddenly the entire Peloponnese had an annual scratchy eye festival. The pollen panic, as it came to be called, was chalked up to divine mystery. But in your very human body, it feels suspiciously like hay fever. At the edge of the grove, a priestess in yellow robes sneezes so violently that a basket of peaches flies out of her hands. Demeter frowns. Tell them to stop breathing so aggressively. It's upsetting the roses. You blink. She's serious. This is going to be a long day. But at least it's a soft one. The sun filters through honeysuckle haze, the grass hums with a sleepy energy, and even the godly chaos seems a little quieter here. Somewhere between sniffles, you notice something odd. A tiny statue of a goat wearing a wreath of chamomile. There's a line of offerings beside it, vials of what look like herbal antihistamines. Who's that? You ask? Demeter doesn't answer. She's already sneezing into a cloud of iris dust, and the wind carries it across the grove like golden confetti. You lean back against the least reactive tree you can find and close your eyes. Maybe, just maybe, if you breathe slowly enough, you wake up to the sound of a goddess muttering curses at a breakfast tray. The sun's moved slightly, just enough for dappled light to fall across Demeter's moss-covered table, a breakfast of honey cake, barley porridge, and something that might be fermented. Apricot foam sits untouched, except for the honey cake. That one's been violently sneezed on. I told Persephone no citrus glaze. Demeter grumbles. Her voice stuffy and filled with betrayal. She always adds lemon zest when I'm vulnerable. You try not to breathe too hard. Pollen still floats in the air like ancient disco dust. Demeter stares at the cake like it's personally responsible for the extinction of a small mammal. And then she does something that terrifies you more than any underworld monster. She eats another bite. The result is immediate and catastrophic. Her sneeze blasts through the grove like a thunderclap. Trees bend. A squirrel is flung off a branch like it's been launched from a mythological trebuchet. A group of migrating birds U-turn mid-flight. Somewhere nearby, a clump of tulips explodes into flame not from heat, but sheer divine friction. You hand her a linen napkin and step back. She ignores both gestures. Did I just sneeze in pentameter? She wonders aloud, dabbing her nose with a dandelion. That was almost poetic. And it was, weirdly, there was a rhythm to it. Even the bees seemed to pause in polite applause. Historically, there are references to sacred utterances made during divine meals. Some scrolls claim Demeter's breakfast sneezes could predict grain yields. Others, more skeptical, think this was just early seasonal rhinitis, made spiritual for political reasons. You'd guess it was both, because right now, her sneeze just fertilized an entire hillside with thyme. Historians still argue whether my immune system is a divine punishment. Demeter says with the voice of someone who's absolutely read her Wikipedia page. You glance at her honey cake. It's definitely plotting something. According to fringe mythographers, usually the kind who scribble notes in the margins of temple walls and then mysteriously vanish, Demeter's allergic responses are connected to emotional tension, especially mother-daughter drama, and especially around Persephone's food choices, as if summoned. A faint giggle echoes through the trees, and then because of course Persephone appears, holding a bouquet of something glowing and entirely unsafe looking. Mother, she beams, throwing her arms open. Happy equinox. Demeter instinctively flinches, not from emotion, but from the bouquet. It looks like it's spitting spores. You take 3 steps back and sneeze twice, which is apparently the secret signal for incoming floral hazard in divine etiquette. Darling, Demeter says through gritted teeth. What is that? Persephone blinks innocently. Lung-root lilies. Hades said they're hypoallergenic. That statement alone contains at least 4 lies. Demeter sneezes so hard that the breakfast table levitates. Her porridge bowl rotates like a lazy moon, spinning barley into concentric rings before settling back down. You clear your throat. Should I burn those? No, Persephone says sweetly. They're sacred in the underworld. Besides, they only trigger reactions in the living, which is probably true, but unhelpful. She sets the bouquet down, and immediately the ground around it wilts like it just got dumped with sarcasm. You edge toward a safer corner of the grove and discover a scroll half buried under a pile of tissues papyrus, probably, and read the title, On the Correlation Between Grief and Grain Yields. The ancient author, 1. Melas of Delphi, theorized that Demeter's allergic flares marked transitional agricultural phases, that the goddess herself was a calendar in motion, her nose a sensitive barometer for climate, emotion, and sibling-related stress. There's also a drawing of a sneeze-powered irrigation device, which, unfortunately, might have worked. Meanwhile, Demeter is now hiccup sneezing, the rarest and most unstable form of divine emission. Persephone is pretending not to notice, but her flowers are glowing brighter. Mother, she says delicately, maybe we should talk about boundaries. Maybe. Demeter says, we should talk about how you once brought home a carnivorous orchid that ate my hymn book. You pretend to be very interested in a beetle crawling across your sandal. It looks like it wants to leave this dimension. A humming tension builds in the air, and Demeter breathes in deeply, heroically trying not to react. You can almost feel the pollen daring her. And then, against all odds, she exhales, calmly. The grove sighs with her. The mood garden softens. Even the squirrel, still recovering from its aerial misadventure, nods in silent respect. You know, Demeter says, eyes still on the bouquet, this could be worse. At least you didn't bring another. Achoo. She doesn't finish. The bouquet bursts open like a smoke bomb. You fall over. Persephone claps her hands like a toddler at a fireworks show. Demeter wipes her nose with a rose petal. Never again. You lie there, dazed, covered in the glittering residue of divine pollen. And you wonder briefly, sleepily, what kind of breakfast it would take to avoid this tomorrow. You spend the next few hours gently vibrating from residual pollen exposure. Somewhere in your skull, your sinuses are holding a tiny protest march. Meanwhile, Demeter insists on dragging you along to her afternoon project, planting a new divine apple tree. You try to object politely, with a sniffle, but Demeter brushes you off. It's tradition, she says, as if traditions involving sneezing sap and cursed soil are universally beloved. The sacred orchard is farther out, past the mood grove, through a thicket of whispering shrubs that all look like they have opinions. Don't make eye contact with the hyssop, Demeter warns as you pass. They judge, you do your best, but it's difficult when they visibly flinch every time you breathe through your mouth. The planting site is a simple clearing with a large hole, a pile of apple seeds the size of walnuts, and a shovel made entirely of petrified basil. Demeter takes a deep breath, dangerous, yes, and begins to chant. The seeds glow faintly. You take 2 steps back and hide behind a stump that seems, at least temporarily, non-lethal. She finishes the chant. She sneezes once, and the ground swells like a belly full of bees. The tree sprouts. It's fast. Too fast. You blink, and it's already 6 feet tall, covered in pinkish blossoms that look beautiful until they open their mouths. Yes, mouths. The blossoms yawn, exhale. Glittery mist, and hum in the key of mild despair. You stare in horror. Oh, good, Demeter says with a soft cough. It's vocal. That means the roots are connecting with local, emotional ley lines. You don't know what any of that means, but you do know that the tree has triggered the single worst allergy attack of your life. Your eyes start to itch. Your ears ring. Your throat is a tiny gravel road paved by vengeance. Demeter tosses you a silken cloth. Breathe through this. It's laced with fig extract and mild denial. You do. It helps. Slightly. She leans against the new tree, proud. You know, the first sacred orchard was much worse. I didn't know about wind patterns back then. An entire town sneezed for 6 months straight. We thought it was a curse, but it turned out I'd over-fertilized with centaur compost. A bee the size of a pear floats by, lazily bumping into your shoulder. You gently push it away and pray it doesn't have opinions. Historians still argue whether the coughing harvest of Eleusis was caused by divine soil manipulation or just an unusually dusty year. Demeter adds, brushing pollen from her robes. You'd vote for divine sabotage, according to a fragment you once read on a bathroom wall near Delphi. The orchard's original trees were so aggressive that they actually sang people into seasonal coughing fits. One even became a minor oracle, though it only predicted mucus production rates. Demeter waves her hand, and the blossoms fall silent. Well, mostly. One is still humming faintly through its pistil. You spot a wooden plaque nearby with some hastily scrawled words. Apples of unearned regret. Please do not inhale. Too late. You sneeze. Again and again. Demeter doesn't even flinch anymore. She just plucks a fruit from the new tree and tosses it your way. For your effort, she says, smiling. May reduce inflammation in goats. You hold the fruit like it's radioactive. It probably is. Then, from the edge of the orchard, you see someone approaching. A priest, maybe, or a professional sneeze collector. He carries a scroll and a clay pot. Lady Demeter. He bows. We've collected the excess pollen as requested. The amphora is sealed this time. Excellent. She nods. Last time it leaked in the pantry and gave a headache to the wine god. You glance at the amphora. It's vibrating. That feels illegal. Demeter turns to you with sudden enthusiasm. Would you like to help me bury this one next week? We'll try a peach tree, but less vocal. You consider your lungs. You consider your will to live. You smile weakly and nod. Somewhere overhead, a flower sneezes. You don't know how, and you don't want to ask. You wake the next morning, covered in what feels like crushed chamomile and divine regret. Your skin smells faintly of mint, and your lungs wheeze in the key of D minor. It takes a moment to realize you fell asleep under one of the less emotional ferns, and that Demeter is already hard at work. Come on, she says, barely looking up from a scroll she's annotated with actual dandelion fluff. We're off to see what Zeus did to the olive groves. You don't even ask. You just follow her. At this point, it's less about curiosity and more about survival. The path is short, but treacherous. You pass a series of tiny shrines, each one marked by an herbal allergy warning. Lavender zone, moderate itching. Thyme thicket, mild delirium. And finally, oregano crossing. Abandon all mucus. Ye who enter here. Demeter snorts at the last one. Dramatic, but not wrong. The olive groves open before you like a soft green sea. Endless rows of twisting silver trees, their leaves shimmering in morning light. It should be peaceful, but something's off. For one, the trees are humming, not in harmony, but in passive-aggressive complaint. Zeus tried a new growth acceleration technique. Demeter explains, wincing as she bends to touch the soil. It involved lightning and a pollen multiplier spell he stole from Apollo. You crouch beside her. The dirt is warm, too warm, and vibrates faintly, like it's holding back a sneeze. He said it would increase olive oil yields. She continues, voice tight. Instead, it gave the entire Spartan Valley hives. They called it the itch harvest. Historians still argue whether Zeus's involvement was direct or whether he just got bored and tossed a thunderbolt out of spite. Either way, the groves never recovered. According to fringe mythology, the olive trees in this region developed defensive pollination and evolutionary quirk where their blossoms eject irritants to scare off birds, or curious humans, or gods who plant things without reading the divine instruction manual. One tree in particular catches your eye. Its bark pulses slightly, like it's breathing. You don't point it out. You pretend it's just the wind. Demeter sighs and pulls a gnarled olive from a branch. It hisses softly, still bitter, she mutters, and yet he insists it's a symbol of peace. You raise an eyebrow. Zeus, she clarifies, gave this to Athens after the Bloom incident. Never mind that half the city had to wear linen face wraps for a decade. You've heard that story. Somewhere between official myth and ridiculous temple gossip, there's a version where Athena and Demeter teamed up to stage a diplomatic accidental windstorm that covered Zeus in his own experimental pollen. It took 3 gods and a very large sneeze to undo it. You move toward a shaded grove where the trees look less angry, or maybe just sleepy. Demeter follows, brushing past branches that seem to lean away in deference. The olives here used to cure fevers, she says wistfully. Now they mostly cause them. You pluck one and sniff it. It smells like ambition and burnt rosemary. Probably best not to taste. She kneels and begins drawing something in the dirt, a ritual glyph, shaped like a nose and a spiral. This is the antihistamine seal, she says, sketching with sharp precision. Hera invented it after Poseidon's seaweed allergy ruined her temple spa. You nod solemnly. Of course, seaweed allergy. The glyph begins to glow faintly. The air settles, a breeze moves through the trees, and for the first time all morning, you don't want to sneeze. Demeter sits back and exhales slowly. There, that'll buy us an hour. It's the calmest the grove has been since you arrived. Birds sing. A lazy bee bumps into your shoulder and keeps going without judgment. You let yourself breathe. And then a tree sneezes. You swear you hear it, an unmistakable kerchew from the oldest looking olive in the corner. Demeter blinks. Oh, not again. The ritual glyph flashes, then fizzles like an underbaked pastry. You back away slowly. Zeus blessed that one personally, she mutters. Called it his pollen prototype. A second sneeze. This time, you see the puff, a dusty spiral that coats your shoes in golden sheen. You're coughing before you can even think. Demeter grabs your hand. Run, you don't argue. As you sprint through the trees, olive branches whip past you, hurling what might be ancient petals or passive-aggressive leaf notes. You think you hear one yell, tell him to keep his thunder to himself. You burst through this grove's edge and collapse near a stream, lungs wheezing, heart racing, and ears ringing with botanical fury. Demeter looks at you, hair full of pollen and olive twigs. Let's never speak of this, she says. Agreed. You've barely caught your breath from the olive grove debacle when Demeter insists on taking you to see Persephone's latest floral obsession. It'll be good for you, she says. Wiping olive pollen from her sandals builds immunity. You're starting to suspect that divine immunity building just means more sneezing in increasingly absurd environments. The path to Persephone's garden winds through a series of stone archways wrapped in creeping vines, each one bearing a discreet warning plaque. The first reads, "Caution. Spores may induce existential dread." The second, "Do not lick the tulips." And finally, "If you hear whispering, it's probably the daffodils. Don't respond." You duck under the last arch and enter a clearing so lush it feels almost smug. Persephone stands in the center, arms outstretched, surrounded by an impossible bouquet of bioluminescent flowers. Her smile is radiant. Her dress is woven from something that shimmers like moonlit beetle shells. "Do you love it?" she asks, spinning slowly. "I call it the bloom room." You nod politely while your sinuses scream. Every plant here is either glowing, vibrating, or humming some off-key lullaby. You spot one flower that appears to be whispering insults to a neighboring fern, imported every single species from the underworld. Persephone beams. It's an emotional garden. Each bloom responds to you. You glance around, worried. Several flowers have wilted slightly since your arrival. One is leaking what looks like glittery despair. Demeter sniffs. "I see the morn blossoms are back. They missed me." Persephone replies cheerfully. "Also, I may have fed them leftover pomegranate seeds soaked in regret wine." "Ah," Demeter says, as if that explains everything. And it does, disturbingly well. You take a cautious step forward. The ground pulses gently beneath your feet. A nearby vine waves at you. You wave back. It hisses. You try not to take it personally. Persephone flits from bloom to bloom, naming each one like their cherished pets. This is Snivelvine. She reacts to insecurity. And this one here is Chokeberry, which releases mild toxin if you say anything passive-aggressive near her. You quietly vow to keep your mouth shut. Forever. Suddenly, a puff of pollen explodes from the largest flower in the clearing. A hulking pink monstrosity with thorns shaped like question marks. Persephone claps. That's Whiffless Maxima. She only blooms when someone in the vicinity feels unspoken guilt. Everyone looks at you. You sneeze violently. Demeter crosses her arms. She brought that one after an argument with Hades. Said it helped her process betrayal. You're not sure what's more concerning, that flowers here bloom based on complex psychological triggers, or that you seem to be activating all of them. Historically, there are vague temple scrolls referencing the Garden of Grudges, an emotional horticulture project designed by Persephone in her late teens. Most scholars think it's metaphorical, but standing here, as a vine tightens around your ankle while softly whispering your childhood fears, you're convinced it's very, very real. Historians still argue whether this garden was meant as a sanctuary or a trap. Demeter mutters as she swats at a flirty dandelion. A fringe theory claims Persephone was experimenting with cathartic botany plants that metabolize unspoken trauma. But when you ask, she just smiles and says, "They're friends. They feel with me." One bloom sneezes. You sneeze back. You're not sure who started it anymore. Persephone leads you deeper into the grove, toward a shadowy alcove where the plants grow taller and more suspicious. "This one's my favorite," she says, caressing the velvety edge of a jet-black lily. "It's called Soufflora. It only opens when someone is lying to themselves. Naturally, it unfurls immediately as you pretend everything is fine. You watch in horror as a puff of iridescent dust spirals toward your face. You duck. It follows. Demeter sighs. She made that one out of Hades' leftover guilt and a handful of basil. Organic basil. Persephone adds, "I'm not a monster." The lily purrs. You start to wheeze. You stagger back toward the garden's exit. where a small placard reads, "Warning, overexposure may result in emotional insights or rash decisions." Fair. Just as you reach the archway, a vine gently wraps around your wrist. You freeze. Persephone smiles. That one likes you. She only clings to people who need a nap. You blink slowly. Maybe the vine has a point. You sit down on the mossy ground, back resting against a mood-neutral rock. The sounds of buzzing, humming, and gentle passive-aggressive petal rustling fade into a warm lull. Maybe, just maybe, this is the safest place to sneeze in peace. You wake up with a vine softly patting your cheek, as if to say, "Sorry for emotionally ambushing you, but you look tired." The moss beneath you smells like tea. Not a specific kind, just a general, ancestral memory of tea. Persephone is gone. Demeter stands nearby, holding a rolled-up scroll and a laurel-etched horn. "It's time," she says, smiling ominously. The festival begins. You sit up, blinking pollen out of your eyelashes. "What festival?" Demeter's eyes twinkle with the kind of delight only found in gods who know. "You didn't read the fine print. The first recorded hay fever festival," she says proudly. You glance around for signs of irony. There are none. Apparently, long ago, long before sneeze-based agriculture was properly documented, villagers desperate to understand Demeter's annual springtime sneezing decided to throw a celebration. A kind of sacrificial, allergy-themed party, she explains, as you walk with her down a winding path. "They thought if they amused me enough, I might sneeze them into a good harvest." You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. Your eyes already chose tears. The festival grounds are dusty. That's your first impression. Everything from the banners to the tablecloths is covered in a soft coating of herbal powder. A group of priests in nose-length veils are hanging garlands of sneeze-triggering plants, ragweed, stinging nettle, and something suspiciously labeled experimental oregano. There's a central podium surrounded by ceremonial tissues. Real tissues, not symbolic ones. Demeter leans close and whispers, "Made from ancient papyrus mixed with goat milk. Pulp. Surprisingly absorbent." You nod respectfully. A man in a robe shaped like a giant nostril greets you. "Are you here to compete?" You shake your head too quickly and trigger a sneeze so powerful your vision wobbles. He claps. "Excellent warm-up." Demeter leads you to the sneeze arena, an open circle surrounded by an enthusiastic crowd. A gong sounds, and the first contestant steps forward. A wiry young man holding what looks like a bouquet of powdered dandelions. He inhales, waits, achoo, a gentle sneeze. Respectable, polite. The crowd murmurs. Next, a muscular woman inhales crushed sage mixed with dried lavender. Her sneeze is thunderous. A banner falls. The crowd cheers. Then it's your turn. "No pressure," Demeter says. "But if you win, you get a wreath made entirely of chamomile and municipal respect." You take the stage, already wheezing. The priest hands you a pinch of what he calls blessed irritant dust. It sparkles. That feels wrong. You inhale. You wait. The tickle builds. It builds more. And then, nothing. The crowd leans in. A breeze passes. Still nothing. You feel betrayed. By your own nose. You glance at Demeter. She shrugs. Try thinking about repressed emotions. You do. That helps. Achoo. It echoes. It reverberates. A nearby goat faints. Several daisies combust. One man in the crowd weeps from joy or possibly pollen exposure. The crowd explodes in applause. The priest places the chamomile wreath on your head. Solemn and proud, you are now the sneeze herald of spring. You mumble your thanks through a fresh wave of coughing. Demeter seems pleased. Well done. The plants respect you now, or at least fear you slightly. As the festival winds down, you're invited to the final ritual, the petal toss of release. Each villager throws a flower into the air, symbolizing the letting go of something irritating an allergy, a bad habit, or an uncle who keeps re-gifting soap. You toss a withered tulip. It explodes into fragrant dust and flutters back down as silence. A peaceful moment. Demeter steps beside you, eyes glassy from the sheer volume of airborne irritants. Historians still argue whether this festival was religious catharsis or collective delusion brought on by extreme pollen exposure. She murmurs, "But I liked it." The sun dips low. People cough in harmony. A child sneezes and the crowd cheers. You sit by the bonfire, one that burns with sandalwood and vague apologies. and let the night hum gently around you. One final sneeze bursts from the grove. Someone wins a pie. You're not sure if anything here makes sense, but it feels like history. And for once, you don't mind the dust. The morning after the festival arrives, wrapped in still air and faint sandalwood smoke. Your lungs ache in a poetic way, the kind of ache that whispers. You survived something ridiculous. Demeter greets you with a scroll in one hand and a goat leash in the other. We're hunting a myth, she says. You blink. The goat bleats. They say, she continues, handing you a pouch of sneeze-dampening herbs. That a golden goat once wandered through Arcadia and triggered the first allergy outbreak. We're going to find it. The goat beside her is neither golden nor mythic. It's grumpy, cross-eyed, and appears to have seasonal depression. Its name, she explains, is Crumb. You follow her into the woods, Crumb reluctantly trailing behind. The trees thicken, casting dappled light across the trail. The air is heavy with unspoken legends and moss that probably judges your posture. Demeter recounts the tale. Centuries ago, a shining goat, Ex Gloriosa, escaped from a divine experiment. Wherever it walked, flowers bloomed in erratic clusters. Birds sneezed mid-song. Villagers broke out in spontaneous itches. Historians still argue whether the goat was real, Demeter says, or whether it was a metaphor for Zeus's dating habits. Crumb sneezes loudly. You ask the obvious question. Why the goat? Symbol of fertility, chaos, and digestive honesty. She replies, also, Hades is mildly allergic to them. Fringe scrolls refer to the sneeze hoof trail, an invisible path only revealed during high pollen season. You seem to have found it. The way forward is littered with oddly clustered mushrooms and flower petals shaped like question marks. As you walk, Demeter shows you a faded amulet, a locket containing a single golden goat hair, allegedly recovered from the Oracle of Tynos. It twitches. You both pretend it didn't. Suddenly, the trees shift. A clearing opens, revealing a stone circle carved with hoofprints and ancient warnings. He who snorts the golden spores shall itch until spring ends. You step carefully. Crumb does not. He rolls in something. A large sneeze-shaped puff erupts. Something laughs. You both freeze. From the opposite end of the clearing steps, another goat, but this one glows faintly, not aggressively, just enough to suggest you may be hallucinating. Its fur shimmers like old coins left too long in a fountain. Its eyes blink slowly, as if unimpressed with reality. Is that, you whisper? Demeter raises an eyebrow. It better be. The golden goat sniffs a wild thistle and sneezes once elegantly. A breeze stirs. 3 trees blossom out of season. Crumb bleats in confusion. You step closer, holding your breath. The goat regards you with ancient indifference, then turns and trots off. No drama, no fireworks. Just leaves a glittering hoof print in a patch of clover and disappears into the forest, like a bored librarian. Demeter exhales slowly. That's it. Then, mystery confirmed. Allergies began with arrogance and hooves. You pick up the clover. It sneezes in your hand. On the walk back, Demeter seems lighter. You've seen the sneeze source? She says, you're part of the myth now. You feel honored and itchy. Later, over lunch, lavender soup and regret muffins, she confesses that she once tried to breed sneeze-resistant wheat by whispering apologies into the soil. It didn't work. But the wheat was emotionally healthier. You nod, unsure what that means. That night, she hangs the goat's hoofprint clover above your cot for blessed congestion. You dream of sparkling pastures, pollen in the shape of musical notes, and a goat that winks every time you try to scratch your nose. The next morning, Crumb is sitting on your chest. You take that as a blessing or a challenge. You wake with Crumb still perched on your chest, breathing heavily like a furry bagpipe. Demeter is already outside, sketching something in the dirt with a stalk of feverfew. Today's adventure, she says it's time to meet Mopsos the mower, a mortal whose sneeze once cut down an entire wheat field. You raise an eyebrow. Or try to. Your eyebrows are slightly crunchy from yesterday's flower confetti. He was a legend, Demeter says, standing proudly. One sneeze, 20 acres flattened. I turned him into a minor demigod out of sheer respect. You follow her through the lower fields, where the grass grows extra tall just to be dramatic. The breeze carries a sharp scent of sage and pollen. And somewhere in the distance, a cow coughs. Mopsos' shrine is surprisingly modest. A carved stone bust of a man mid-sneeze, eyes closed, nostrils flared, beard windswept. Someone has lovingly placed a bundle of wild garlic beneath his chin. According to myth or a very bored historian, Mopsos was once a simple harvester. Every spring, his hay fever would return with the fury of 10,000 airborne regrets. One year, during a particularly cursed allergy season, he sneezed with such apocalyptic force that every wheat stalk within 3 villages lay flat. The harvest was early. The bread was abundant. The gods took notice. Historians still argue whether this event was an actual sneeze or a poetic retelling of a locust plague, but the villagers built him a temple regardless, half in worship, half in fear. You sit beside the shrine as Demeter recounts her favorite parts. The time Mopsos accidentally shaved a hillside with his sinuses, the local goat that followed him, convinced he was a wind god. The week-long festival where people faked sneezes to honor him, but were disqualified if they didn't produce at least one visible petal. Demeter touches the stone bust gently. He never asked for worship, but he always carried tissues. You peer around the shrine. The offerings are oddly specific. Jars of honey, wool scarves, and an alarming number of jars labeled wheat sneeze essence. There's also a scroll tucked beneath the statue's feet. You unroll it carefully. It reads, "To sneeze is to be alive. To sneeze with purpose is to farm." You nod respectfully. Then Demeter leads you further into the fields, real wheat now, tall and golden, gently swaying in unison. She pauses at the edge. This was Mopsos' last sneeze zone. Watch. She raises her hand. A gust of wind stirs. The wheat ripples. A single stalk sneezes. You step back. That can't be right. But then another stalk twitches, and another, until a soft wave of kerchoo-like sound rolls across the field. Demeter beams. I seeded this generation with mimicry pollen. It echoes the myth. Now, every harvest comes with a little drama. You can't tell if this is genius or agricultural performance art. Suddenly, Crumb charges into the wheat, scattering petals and sneezing like he's chasing ghosts. The plants respond. The whole field sighs, sneezes, then returns to gentle rustling. You stand there, stunned, covered in sneeze residue and awe. Demeter hands you a handkerchief embroidered with ears of grain. Souvenir, she says, on your walk back. She tells you Mopsos once asked to retire. He wanted to live a quiet, sniffle-free life by the sea. But the gods had other plans. They gave him a mountain breeze that never stopped stirring pollen. His sacrifice, Demeter says, is why bread has flavor. You're pretty sure that's not true, but you let it be. That night, under a wheat-scented moon, you light a tiny candle for Mopsos. You whisper a thank you. You sneeze 3 times. Somewhere in the wind, a laugh stirs the fields. The next morning greets you with flower dust in your shoes and a formal invitation. A scroll sealed with a dandelion puff that disintegrates the second you touch it. Demeter reads it aloud. To the honored herald of histamines. Your attendance is required at the reenactment of the Tulip War. You groan. Crumb sneezes in solidarity. Demeter claps her hands. Oh, good. They're still doing it. Apparently, the Tulip War was a highly embarrassing episode in divine gardening history. An all-out passive-aggressive battle between Demeter's priesthood and Hera's temple botanists over botanical aesthetic dominance. It wasn't technically a war, Demeter says as she helps you put on your ceremonial sneeze-resistant sash, but a lot of gladiolas were harmed. The reenactment takes place in an amphitheater made entirely of hedges. The seating is leafy and confusing. You're ushered to the coughing box, a front-row perch where guests are expected to occasionally sneeze to honor the drama. Across the field, 2 camps are being set up. Demeter's devotees in soft greens and earthy tones, carrying pollen-dispersing fans and baskets of tulip bulbs. And Hera's floral elite, dressed in shimmering pastels with weaponized bouquets that look suspiciously sharp. A narrator begins. In the 6th spring of the first sneeze era, tensions blossomed between the wheat-bearing folk and the ornamental orchid partisans. You zone out slightly as the opening monologue floats above your head like overly formal bees. But then the action begins. Demeter's team starts planting rows of tulips aggressively. Each bulb thuds into the soil like a strategic insult. Hera's camp responds with a sudden wave of perfume spritzers laced with ambrosia essence and hurt feelings. Someone on your left sneezes so hard they fall out of their hedge seat. The crowd cheers. The conflict escalates quickly. Floral trebuchets are wheeled out. Yes, actual vine-bound catapults launching bundles of dusty lilies. One bundle explodes on impact and releases a haze of shimmering spores that smells like envy and cinnamon. Demeter watches with delight. I taught them that move. Across the battlefield, Hera's camp unleashes their final weapon, the dandelion storm. Hundreds of seed heads are launched into the air, their fluff glinting like divine dandruff. The wind shifts. Everyone braces. You, unfortunately, inhale at the worst possible moment. You don't sneeze. You detonate. The sheer force knocks over your hedge bench. Crumb jumps sideways into a hydrangea and disappears. A hush falls over the amphitheater. And then, applause. A flower-shaped medal is placed around your neck. The narrator intones solemnly. And thus, the Herald of Histamines has honored the tradition of seasonal warfare. Demeter leans over. You're a natural. Later, there's a post-battle feast under arbor canopies strung with allergy-safe lanterns. You're offered combat tulip wine and peace poppy bread. It all smells faintly like victory and throat lozenges. You meet one of the Hera team captains, an elderly woman with sharp cheekbones and a sneeze tattoo. Good work today, she says, shaking your hand. You sneezed like a prophet. Apparently, in the centuries since the Tulip War, sneeze reenactment societies have sprung up across regions of Greece. Entire temple economies flourished around seasonal pollen plays. Historians still argue whether the war was ever real, the captain says, sipping from a daffodil-stemmed cup. Or if we just made it up to justify all the sneezing. You think it's probably both. You spend the evening watching a flower duel between two 9-year-olds using dandelion stems like swords. One wins when the other laughs and breathes in a mouthful of fluff. Demeter sits beside you, head tipped back against a cedar beam. It's good, she murmurs, to see something silly survive this long. The wind picks up. Tulip petals fall like lazy confetti. You sneeze again, gently this time. No one claps, but a rose winks at you. The morning is suspiciously quiet. No goats, no sneezing trees, no airborne rituals. You open your eyes to find yourself beneath a roof of pressed reeds and flower-threaded linen. Demeter stands at the entrance of what she calls the Temple of Tissues, a low, stone structure shaped like a folded handkerchief. This, she says reverently, is where pilgrims once came seeking clear sinuses and metaphorical relief. You raise an eyebrow. The metaphor was optional, she admits. The temple interior is hushed, filled with faint floral incense and soft walls adorned with sacred nose-related frescoes. One depicts a demigod blowing his nose into a cloud that rains lavender tea. Another shows a priest handing tissues to weeping villagers with all the solemnity of a royal scroll delivery. According to Demeter, the original worshippers here were farmers desperate for sleep and sneeze relief. They believed the goddess could absorb their allergies by sneezing with them, in harmony. A little dramatic, sure, but relatable. At the far end of the room stands the Altar of Respiration, a stone basin containing what Demeter claims is the first documented box of tissues, papyrus-based, infused with chamomile and divine compromise. Historians still argue whether this box was real or a late-stage myth invented by merchants to sell sacred sneeze cloths. You peer into the basin. Inside are folded squares of golden-hued fabric, still soft after centuries. You pick one up gently and hold it to your face. It smells like old lemon balm, moss, and a slight whiff of heavenly humility. Demeter nods solemnly. You may blow your nose. You hesitate. The pressure of centuries weighs on you, but eventually, with the grace of someone halfway through a pollen overdose, you sneeze once into the sacred cloth. Nothing explodes. No trees burst into bloom. Just silence. Good, she says. The temple accepts you. You sit with her beneath a mosaic showing Persephone as a child, braiding garlands for ghosts. Around her, small specters carry tiny handkerchiefs and float gently through fields of sneeze-safe blossoms. Demeter sighs. She tried to cure the allergy once, thought if she sang to the flowers at night, they'd stop spreading irritants out of spite. And, you ask, they sang back, she replies, and they were spiteful. You glance around. Votive offerings line the room. Jars of mint oil, bundles of eucalyptus, handwritten scrolls titled, "Please just let me breathe for one day." You recognize the desperation. Outside, a group of devotees arrives with humble offerings, onions, leeks, and a scroll labeled anti-cough psalms. They whisper their allergies into tiny clay urns, which are then sealed and stored in the archive of irritations. A literal library of everyone's worst spring memories. You're handed a small scroll. Go on, Demeter says, write something down. Something your body's tired of reacting to. You think for a moment, then scribble. Whispers from sneaky flowers, the judgmental vines, pollen shaped like emotions. You hand it over. It's placed on a cedar shelf between windborne nostalgia and goat dander, a memoir. Later, Demeter invites you to lie down on a reed mat covered in sneeze-resistant herbs. She recites soft mantras passed down from harvest priestesses. Breathe through the fog. Let the petals float past your pride. May your nostrils bloom only in peace. You drift off, light filters through the linen ceiling, and just before you sleep, you hear someone at the altar whisper, "He sneezed well." You smile. You wake slowly, surrounded by warmth and that familiar temple sneeze smell, lavender, sage, and faint regret. Demeter greets you with a cup of something steaming, mint thyme tea, she says, for respiratory peace and minor prophecy. You sip cautiously. It tastes like a polite disagreement between your sinuses and destiny. Today's destination, the underworld. Yes, that underworld. Hades has apparently summoned Demeter for a brief floral policy review. You're coming along for emotional support, or maybe as her designated allergy translator. The descent begins with a dark staircase behind a fig tree that apologizes as you pass. The steps are carved into basalt and inscribed with floral warnings. No daisies beyond this point, chrysanthemums not welcome, and lilies must be declared. At the bottom, a sleek obsidian door with a bronze knocker shaped like a sneezing lion. Demeter knocks once. The door sighs open. The underworld is colder than expected and drier. You instinctively breathe deeper, only to start coughing. Don't inhale too quickly, Demeter advises. The air's filtered through nostalgia. You pass fields of ash-colored tulips and melancholy vines. Ghosts drift by, carrying bouquets of withered roses. No one sneezes down here, not because it's clean, but because grief isn't airborne. You finally arrive at Hades' floral annex, a dimly lit chamber stacked with pots, trellises, and flower beds glowing faintly with underworld magic. Persephone greets you with a hug and a wreath of black hydrangeas. Mother, she says carefully, we've had a minor bloom event. Demeter pinches the bridge of her nose. Hades appears behind a curtain of wilting orchids, rubbing his temples like a man haunted by peonies. I told her not to crossbreed gloom blossoms with surface lilies, he mutters. Now everything sighs. You look around. He's not exaggerating. Every flower in the room lets out a slow, emotional exhale when touched. It's unsettling. He adds, one coughed on me. Demeter examines a pot of night carnations. These are out of sync. You're feeding them too much memory. Excuse me. A daffodil moans in the corner. I was fine until the pomegranate pollen showed up. You blink. The daffodil shudders and sneezes dramatically. A ghost nearby claps politely. Persephone shrugs. They're emotionally responsive now. It's the future of flora. Demeter sighs. No, it's a seasonal disaster. What follows is a full-blown parental argument disguised as a botanical audit. Demeter insists on pruning the emotional hibiscus. Persephone defends her grief garden therapy model. Hades attempts to meditate in the corner using incense made of mild existential panic. You stand very still next to a ficus that hums an E-flat and pretend to read a scroll labeled sinus relief for the recently deceased. Eventually, Demeter loses patience. She conjures a gust of wind surface wind, potent and fresh, and the entire chamber erupts in a chorus of plant sneezes. Petals fly. Spores glitter. One ghost floats away on a sneeze draft, murmuring, "Freedom at last." Historians still argue whether this event was divine sabotage, Hades says, brushing pollen off his robes, or just an overreaction to scented therapy plants. He's not mad. Exactly. Just disappointed in botany. Demeter straightens. I'll send a maintenance dryad. Make it one that doesn't hum. Hades replies. Persephone waves goodbye. giving you a small pouch. "Take these," she whispers. They're sleep poppy seeds infused with mild forgiveness. For later, you don't ask questions. As you ascend back to the surface, Demeter grumbles under her breath. No one listens to the goddesses who sneeze anymore. The fig tree nods in sympathy as you re-emerge. Back in the grove, everything feels sharper, louder. Sunlight has texture again. You lie down under the quietest fern and let the underworld's memory mist fade from your clothes. Above you, a single daisy lets out a soft cough. You've barely dusted the last of the underworld pollen from your robes when Demeter whisks you off again, this time to Mount Olympus itself. "It's dinner," she says grimly. "Gods, long table, too many courses. Bring your antihistamines." You hike up the golden staircase in silence, wondering if divine formal wear includes sneeze-proof linen. It does not. By the time you reach the summit, your eyes are already watering. The banquet hall glows with impossible light. Ambrosia drips from floating platters. Wine flows from a harp. There's a harp for cheese, too. It weeps Gouda. You're seated beside Demeter, across from Hera, who is wearing a perfume so intense it feels like floral revenge. You sneeze once. Hera raises a brow. "It's the gladiolus and your crown." You whisper, "I find them bold." She replies, "Boldness builds tolerance." You nod, eyes twitching. Dinner begins. First course, nectar poached olives with essence of yarrow. Demeter sniffs hers suspiciously and quietly swaps it with your plate. Second course, cloud root salad, misted with juniper pollen. A chorus of nymphs cough gently in harmony. Third course, ambrosia reduction with crystallized petal garnish. Demeter makes it to the fourth bite before it happens. A sniff, a twitch, and then a chew. The chandelier rattles. One of Apollo's lyres detunes itself out of self-preservation. Hera waves a scented fan. "Really, Demeter? Must you? It's the lilies." Demeter hisses. "You're hiding them in the napkins again. They're seasonal." Hera says smoothly and emotionally supportive. Zeus clears his throat, trying to regain control. "Let us speak of the new spring rituals. Let's speak of why my salad had dandelion pollen disguised as sage." Demeter snaps. You sip your wine and attempt to disappear into your chair. Unfortunately, the chair is sentient and opinionated. It shifts under you. Whispering something about sinus pressure and posture, the tension thickens like lavender gravy. Ares sneezes once. Surprisingly dainty, Athena frowns at him. He shrugs. Ambrosia hits different this year. You notice Dionysus watching everything with quiet amusement. Historians still argue whether divine dinners ever accomplished anything. He says, swirling a glass of fermented fern fizz, or if we all just like it watching each other sneeze, you excuse yourself to the balcony, where the air is fresher and filled with only mild, philosophical pollen. Demeter follows, still sniffling. They never understand. She mutters, "All I want is a sneeze-free spring solstice." Is that so much to ask? You offer her a tissue from the underworld pouch Persephone gave you. It glows slightly, smells like forgiveness and pine. She blows her nose. The stars shimmer in sympathy. Behind you, someone sneezes hard enough to knock over a soup tureen, probably Poseidon. He never reacts well to basil. Demeter exhales and leans on the balcony rail. "One day, I'll host dinner. It'll be outside. No perfume, no pollen traps, just root vegetables and non-judgmental breezes." You nod. "And wheat toast." She smiles. Crisped over gentle lava, you both stare at the sky. A shooting star sneezes as it falls. You pretend not to notice. The next morning, you find yourself deep in the countryside, your nose still tender from Mount Olympus's olfactory onslaught. Demeter is already awake, spreading bundles of dried herbs across a worn table carved from a single sneeze-inducing yew trunk. "Today," she says with unearned enthusiasm, "we're investigating the pollen plagues of prophecy." You groan. "That's not real." She grins. "Tell that to the oracles of Rion, who used to sniff rosewood dust until they fainted and muttered visions. According to ancient myth and several temples that no longer exist because of mildew, there was a brief, unfortunate time in Greek history when sneezing was seen as divine revelation. It started when a traveling prophet sneezed violently during a wheat blessing and immediately declared, "A goat will ascend, and grain shall fall." A week later, a goat got stuck in a windmill. People panicked. Prophets started carrying spice satchels just to induce visions. Historians still argue whether this era marked a genuine theocratic shift or just a regional cold season with delusions of grandeur. To investigate, Demeter drags you toward an old marble amphitheater where the Order of the Predictive Sinus once performed. A stone sign reads, 1 sneeze for yes, 2 for war. Inside, villagers reenact the rituals once practiced by their pollen-huffing ancestors. One woman breathes in powdered lilac and starts babbling about an eel revolution. Another man snorts time and yells, "Never trust silent bees." You try to leave. Demeter grabs your wrist. "No, you're next." A young acolyte hands you a bowl of ancient sneeze dust. It smells like sage, nostalgia, and a tiny bit of foot. You take a breath, hold it, sneeze once. A hush falls over the amphitheater. Then Demeter, eyes wide, dramatically declares, "A prophecy is born." You cough. "No, it's just dust." Too late. Someone's drawing your face on a clay tablet. Children begin chanting. 1 sneeze, 1 truth. Demeter whispers, "Might as well go with it." It's how the last oracle got free figs for life. She guides you to the center platform and hands you a bouquet of heavily judgmental daisies. They're sensitive to dishonesty. If they wilt, it means someone lied. You hold the flowers. They instantly collapse. The villagers gasp. Demeter stares. "You haven't told me something." You glance away. "I may have sneezed on the sacred wheat loaf last week." She exhales. That explains the erratic sprouting. Suddenly, the daisies revive. Someone faints. To conclude the ritual, you are wrapped in a pollen-resistant shawl and given a ceremonial pretzel. It's stale, but symbolic. Then comes the closing rite. The dusting of the wind. Each villager throws a handful of scented powder into the breeze while declaring something they're letting go. Dry eyes, goat shame. My ex who was allergic to kindness. You toss yours, muttering. Public sneezing pressure. The powder swirls, catches sunlight, and briefly forms the shape of Crumb the goat. Coincidence? Probably, but you let the moment pass without question. Demeter clasps your shoulder. "You're doing well. Am I a prophet now?" "No," she says gently. "But you're allergic enough to pretend." You watch the breeze carry the pollen upward toward clouds that twitch like they're about to sneeze rain. You're halfway through a late afternoon nap beneath a peaceably humming plum tree when Demeter shakes you awake, holding what looks like a subpoena. "They're summoning me to Olympus again," she says flatly. "But this time, it's a trial." You sit up slowly. Trial, or divine theater trial where nobody listens and everyone throws flowers. She sighs. Trial. The High Council of Unseasonable Consequences wants me to answer for allegedly cursing humanity with allergies on purpose. You blink. Crumb, munching a sandal nearby, sneezes supportively. You travel by Windvine, a lightning-fast chariot woven from sneeze-resistant ivy and vaguely disgruntled swans. As you rise toward Olympus, Demeter rehearses under her breath. "I didn't invent ragweed. I am ragweed adjacent." That's different. The courtroom is a circular colonnade made of petrified pollen. Every time you move, golden dust clouds puff out like powdered accusations. The gods are seated in a semicircle, Zeus in the center, Hera beside him fanning herself with passive aggression. Apollo looks bored. Athena's reading a scroll titled Pollen and the Mind, Histories of Hysteria. Hermes is eating grapes, loudly. Demeter takes her place at the center. You're seated behind her as her non-divine witness. You try not to sneeze in the direction of anyone who can smite you. The trial begins. Demeter. Zeus intones. You stand accused of creating seasonal afflictions through unchecked grief. Flora and inappropriate divine sneezing. Demeter raises an eyebrow. Are we pretending no one else has cursed humanity with less noble intentions? Ahem! Hera interrupts. This is about springtime suffering, not marital infidelity. Stay on topic. Demeter holds up a faded scroll, a weathered list of all known allergy incidents caused by divine emotion. Most are hers. A few have suspicious initials like P, D, probably Poseidon or A. St. Ares spicy perfumes. You're called to testify. You step forward. The gods lean in. State your experience, Athena says. You clear your throat. I have sneezed in 7 groves, 2 orchards, and 1 regrettable reenactment war. I have suffered. Apollo nods. And do you blame Demeter? You look at her. She's holding a chamomile petal like it's a fragile defense. No, you say. I blame pollen. A soft murmur rolls through the courtroom. And who invented that? Hera demands. Demeter stands. Flowers. Flowers did. I just encourage them to express themselves. Zeus frowns. You once crossbred grief tulips with emotional snapdragons. They were gentle snapdragons. She snaps. They only triggered thoughts of lost pets and mild longing. Hermes snorts a grape. Historians still argue, Athena says, adjusting her scroll, whether these incidents reflect agricultural innovation or weaponized emotional botany. The courtroom pauses. Everyone glances at you again. You sneeze. Once. Loudly. A petal falls from the ceiling. Zeus sighs. Fine. The court rules that Demeter's effects were collateral, not malicious. Demeter blinks. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. The sentence, she must spend 1 day a year not sneezing. A divine fast of the nose. A ritual of restraint. Demeter accepts, begrudgingly. As you leave, she mutters, they never punish Dionysus for fermented confusion. Outside, the wind smells like justice and lemon balm. Crumb is waiting at the base of the stairs, wearing what looks like a congratulatory wreath made of sneezeberries. You're not sure if it is supportive or deeply cursed. Back on Earth, Demeter places her court scroll in a cedar box labeled Minor Vindications. You lie back under your tree, somewhere, very faintly. A lily sneezes. You wake up feeling like maybe, just maybe, the world has stopped blooming directly into your face. The air is still. The ferns aren't whispering insults. Crumb is asleep on his side, snoring into a dandelion. For the first time in what feels like weeks, nothing is sneezing. Not even you? Demeter appears beside you, her arms full of spades, seeds, and something pulsing faintly in a clay pot. She says it casually, like she's asking if you want tea. We're planting one last flower. You sit up, slowly, cautiously. Why do I feel like this one's going to explode? She tilts her head. Because it might. You follow her deep into the untouched part of the grove where the sunlight filters through thick branches like syrup, and the ground feels softer, quieter. Here, the air carries none of the usual floral chaos, just silence. At the center of the clearing is a perfectly round patch of soil. Demeter kneels, opens the clay pot, and pulls out a single seed wrapped in silver moss. What is it? You ask. She doesn't answer at first, just presses the seed into the dirt and exhales one long, slow breath. It's called Last Bloom. She says finally, a flower that reacts not to seasons, or emotions, or grief, but to the act of remembering something you wish you hadn't. You stare at the patch of earth. That seems dangerous. Oh, it is. She smiles faintly, but also beautiful. If it blooms, the ground shifts. A stem emerges slowly, cautiously, like it knows it's being watched. A single bud forms at the top. No color yet, just pale, uncertain green. Demeter places a hand on your shoulder. The first one bloomed when Persephone left the first time. It only lasted a minute. Then it burst into pollen so potent it rewrote a bird's memories. Which bird? We never found out. It flew off speaking fluent regret. You sit with her in silence as the bud begins to swell. You feel something in your chest tighten. Not pain, not sadness, just pressure. Like a sneeze from the soul. Some say last bloom is the reason humans forget their dreams, she murmurs. It collects what you almost remember, then releases it in the air. Historians still argue whether last bloom was a metaphor for unresolved emotion or a botanical prank left behind by Prometheus after a particularly passive-aggressive breakup. The scrolls contradict each other. As usual, suddenly, the flower opens. No petals, just light. A soundless burst, not loud, not violent, just release. You don't sneeze, you exhale. And for the first time since all this began, the inside of your head feels clear. You feel something warm in your chest. Maybe it's closure. Maybe it's just time-infused breath. Demeter closes her eyes beside you. I've been waiting a long time for that bloom, she says softly. The light fades. The flower withers instantly, leaving only a faint spiral etched in the dirt. You sit there for a long time. The grove still, the vines polite, the petals quiet, and then, in the far distance, you hear it. A sneeze. Not yours. Not Demeter's. Just the world. Exhaling back, The sun dips low behind the grove, casting long, gold-soft shadows across the trees. You lie back, your head resting against the smooth bark of a sleepy cedar. The air is still. No pollen hovers now, just the scent of cooled soil, mint, and something gently forgotten. Demeter hums a low tune somewhere behind you, her voice carried by the slow rustle of dust. Even Crumb is quiet, curled like a punctuation mark at the edge of your vision. Nothing stirs in the garden but time. The flowers have closed their eyes. The vines no longer whisper. The breeze is light now, not searching, just passing through. Your breath, once strained, comes easy. In, out. A rhythm you don't have to think about anymore. The gods above fall quiet in their sky palaces. No more trials, no more prophecy. Just the soft hush of petals folding in for the night. And maybe tomorrow you'll sneeze again, but not tonight. Tonight, the world rests, so let yourself drift. Let the last bloom fade. Let your thoughts loosen, petal by petal, until there's only peace. And sleep, just sleep.